1970s, gay men were outlaws.
Things like attempted murder and rape in workplaces simply for being transgender.
When I first set up a youth group in Shepparton, I got my car vandalised, I was physically assaulted.
It was terrifying.
He said, you ought to have transsexual tattooed on your forehead.
It's really important that the law protects people from discrimination.
If you want people to change their position from this position to that position, you need to build a relationship. Part of the task is to get in the door, and then you can blow their tiny brains.
Look, it's a small piece of legislation, but can I tell you, it packs a big punch.
We didn't have recognition of relationships. The anti-discrimination legislation was for lawful sexual activity, which didn't reflect most of our lives. There were no transgender rights.
People would be outright refused service in shops simply because they were any part of the trans and gender diverse kaleidoscope. They would be denied access to toilets.
People will often not be aware that back in the 1970s, gay men were outlaws. Well, either they were celibate or they were outlaws, because all sex between men was criminal.
You said I wasn't allowed to swear. Bloody awful. I have to remember when I joined the Victoria Police in 1971, it was still illegal. With a little bit of luck, most weekends I would commit at least one felony or two misdemeanours if I had an extremely good weekend. It was terrifying.
We were campaigning through the 70s to get the law changed, to bring about equality, and we succeeded in 1980.
It was back in 1980 that homosexuality was decriminalised by Rupert Hamer, and that was I think, the fundamental bedrock from which everything else followed. And I think governments of all persuasions since then have been chipping away at discrimination over the years.
In the 80s, it still felt that it was very hard to get a job if you transitioned.
What happened was I ended up losing business. I was a driving instructor at the time, and I tried to tell them that I'm going to change, and of course they just, weren't going to cope with that.
Our anecdotal evidence was that 95% of people who wanted to affirm their true gender identity and keep the same job were just fired on the spot.
I remember one of the guys at work saying to me around about the time I transitioned, you ought to have transsexual tattooed on your forehead so blokes like me aren't tricked into being poofters.
People being sacked or discriminated against in the workplace, people who had experienced vilification in the street. The police responses in those days weren't that fabulous.
Things like attempted murder and rape in workplaces simply for being transgender, who had no recourse, and despite laws that may have existed generally, would perhaps go to police and face transphobia from police at that time.
I had other people at work tell me that I should leave my sexual deviance at home and things like that.
And so it was a pretty disastrous situation. Basics of life that cisgender people would take for granted, such as being able to have the career they wanted, get the goods and services they wanted, and be members of organisations, just weren't happening.
In workplaces, I think it was everything from, the coffee room conversations about what you did on the weekend and the pronouns of your partner, and always being cautious and aware that you may not get fired, but you may not get promotion.
I would answer the telephone to someone saying, I've been discriminated against by my boss at work and I need to leave my job, but I can't do anything about it because under lawful sexual activity, his lawyers have said that I wasn't having sex, so that law doesn't apply to me.
It's actually a very, very narrow ground or attribute to try and squeeze in some discrimination that LGBTI people might face.
The wording lawful sexual activity was obscure, concentrated on activity which was completely inappropriate, unnecessary, and this curious adding of lawful, which seemed to imply, or could easily imply, that somehow aspects of being gay were unlawful.
It's really important that the law protects people from discrimination. on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, so that LGBTI people can feel as though they can be themselves at work and can be out at work, or can transition and they'll be supported by their employer.
There was a clear need to get an inclusive as possible gender identity definition into equal opportunity law.
So when Rob Hulls, the Labor Attorney General, came into power at the end of 1999, one of the first things he did was to organise a group of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender activists to advise him on how to go ahead.
So I set about consulting very widely with stakeholders. They made it quite clear that legislation amendments had to be made and had to be made quickly.
And there were some good people on both sides of politics, and there were some people who were less than ideal on both sides of politics. Perhaps with tongue wedged firmly in cheek, that proves politicians are people as well.
Social change is challenging because we elect people to Parliament and they're all individuals and have different views and prejudices and things that they support. For these human rights issues, that it works best when it's a collaborative approach and there's support across party divides.
I think it was about having the right elements in place at the right time, having an effective lobby group from the community. And by effective, I don't mean loud or stringent, I mean sensitive to the needs of the people who are not understanding what's going on.
That's the key in lobbying. It's about relationships, and if you want people to change their position from this position to that position, then you need to take them with you. You can't just prosecute an argument and expect them to agree with you. You need to build a relationship.
Having supportive services, I did find some allies within general practice, within mainstream healthcare, and then finally having a government that is willing to put their hand up and make big changes, potentially at risk of losing votes.
Part of the task is to get in the door, and then you can blow their tiny brains. But you've got to get in the door first.
The critical thing is that is when, in 2000, sexual orientation, gender identity were expressly covered in the Equal Opportunity Act by name.
I think we need to be proud that we got the equal opportunity through, and proud of our parliamentarians who pushed it.
The effect of it has been really important ways that we can have that conversation to say, hey, wait a minute, what you've just said hurts, and we have a whole mechanism backed up to actually say, your harm that you've just done to me, you've got to be accountable.
Unequivocally, it has enabled people to stand up against discrimination.
I think that protected attributes are a message to the community which says that you can't discriminate against people on the basis of particular attributes, and so it's broadened the community's views about what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable.
Changing pieces of legislation is very important because it sends a strong message that the government, on behalf of the community, won't tolerate discrimination in any form.
The changes in the Equal Opportunity Act in 2000 definitely helped a number of people in the workplace. It also brought to the attention of the managers, the HR departments, that they actually needed to deal with this.
That important amendment is part of a significant journey. The Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Act as it is now, it's the first time that government and the legislation put its toe in the water to reflect the institutional discrimination against LGBTI people.
Look, it's a small piece of legislation, but can I tell you, it packs a big punch because it sent a message to the wider Victorian community that the days of discrimination in Victoria were at an end.
Look, I think the progress of LGBTI equality over my lifetime has been substantial, but there's still a lot to do.
In 2000, the Equal Opportunity Act finally had sexual orientation and gender identity in it. Well, I would have to say we didn't get the definition of gender identity in the sophisticated and correct form that we now realise we should have.
We need to start working on equality within the LGBTI community, and that for me, personally, as someone whose sexual orientation comes under the bisexual umbrella, the research that we have sadly shows that bi people are further behind in terms of mental health outcomes, and that are often still struggling to achieve that basic affirmation. And also, whilst I'm not intersex, I'm very much aware that there are still major issues for people experiencing intersex, and that of course starts so early in life if they receive a surgery that is not helpful.
At the moment, our intersex people are really subsumed into the category of gender identity under Victorian law, and when you are trying to capture the discrimination they face, it's incorrect to say that they're suffering discrimination because of their gender identity. They often face discrimination because of the way they are, their physical sex characteristics.
There are some parts of the community, particularly around the religious exemptions, that think that it's still okay to discriminate, and they think that they're protected in the law. And we don't test it very often. They probably aren't if we actually tested it.
Currently, our Equal Opportunity Act really doesn't equip the Commission, our equal opportunity regulator, with powers to investigate discrimination at a systemic level. It really relies on individuals to bring a complaint in order for any process of investigation to start.
You know, with hindsight, it had its shortcomings, such as the fact that it tied people in a way to their, what we would now call recorded or assigned body, sex based on body at birth in a way. But at least it would try to be more inclusive than a lot of surgery-based definitions or transition-based definitions.
We still have both institutional discrimination and we still have some corners of stigma and prejudice against gender diverse and different sexual orientations across our community.
We know that there's homophobia in the workplace, we know there's biphobia, we know there's transphobia, we know that trans people aren't supported through transition, for example.
We have to continue to be vigilant, we have to continue to review all legislation.
We need the acceptance to be understood, so we need the acceptance to help educate, and I think that just goes around in the circle.
We have to continue to conduct education campaigns throughout the wider community to ensure that discrimination in any form finally comes to an end.
Well, trans healthcare is a huge new area for most GPs and most health providers. You know, that's going to be a big issue in the next few years to train up mainstream health providers to provide good and effective care for trans people.
Transgender and gender diverse people often go to a psychiatrist or psychologist and spend the first few sessions paying the psychiatrist or psychologist while educating them.
It'd be good if we had more resources available for mainstream general practitioners to have some training in managing sexuality and gender diversity.
I think it's around education. I think people generally want to do the right thing.
I would hope that the stories, our stories, are promulgated so that young people who feel gender diverse can step up and get something done.
Almost feel like LGBTI are in the driver's seat, and I think that sets a very important tone for the future. Sometimes in the past it's almost like we've had to beg for our rights, and we're sure there's still distance to travel, but the thing is we're on the right road, and a lot of times when transphobia, homophobia, biphobia comes up, it's knocked down pretty quickly, which didn't happen even 5 years ago.
The attitudes are obviously changing, and we know that that's happening because more and more people are coming out.
The children of families that have same-sex parents or mixed parentage, extended families where people have transitioned as parents, the children of these families are growing up. They're going to become parents themselves in next to no time.
It's much harder to be homophobic when someone you love and care about is gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans or intersex.
Being an ally doesn't have to be a huge or difficult task. It is basically just being nice to the people you care about.
I think that we will have a world where there's a much more appreciative understanding of the diversity that we have right across cultures, right across genders and right across sexualities.
The last 3 years have seen change at a rapid rate that sometimes is hard to keep up with. Well, if that's the biggest problem we've got, that it's hard to keep up with the level of change, that I think gives us some sense of excitement and hope for the future. We just need to be mindful of, yeah, sure, there's still a lot of negatives to overcome. Let's start looking at the amazing positives that trans and gender diverse people as part of all of LGBTI can bring, and then we'll have a much better society, economy and planet.